Hi everyone, good to have you with us. Take a look at these pictures from the Strait of Hormuz. This is a Thai-flagged cargo ship on fire after it was hit in the strait earlier this week. Iran has claimed responsibility. It's one of several cargo ships that have come under attack here in the past few days as part of the Iran war. Today, we're looking at what the disruptions to this relatively small stretch of water mean for the global economy and for all of us, really. Thanks for being with us today. My name's Jared Reid.
And I'm Gerhard Elfers. We'd love to hear from you today, so send us your questions and comments down here in the chat. In just a moment, we'll go live to the strait itself, and a bit later we'll also be speaking to an Iranian analyst about what's driving the leadership in Tehran right now. Very curious about that. And we get some real economic expertise into the studio. Stephen Beardsley from our business desk will be joining Jared and me right here in the studio a bit later. So if there's something you'd like to ask any of our guests, drop it in the chat.
But before we do that, a quick bit of context about why this place matters so much. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is about 160 kilometres long, but at its narrowest point, just 33 kilometres wide. It's one of the most important shipping routes in the world because roughly a fifth of the world's crude oil passes through here. So it's a crucial export route for the big Gulf producers. Right now, it's been closed for more than a week, and this is giving Iran enormous leverage because it effectively controls access to the strait. The International Energy Agency says the war is already causing the largest oil supply disruption in history. And Iran's new supreme leader, you might have seen him in the past few days, he says the strait will stay firmly shut. We can speak now to Philip Crowther. He's a correspondent with the Associated Press. You might know him because he speaks about 1 million languages, but we're going to get his expertise not on linguistics, but he's in the Strait of Hormuz today, so we're going to be talking to him about that. Philip, it's really great to have you here. Just tell us, where are you exactly and what it's like there?
Yeah, great to be with you too. Thank you for having me. You can see the Strait of Hormuz, the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, right behind me. If you really were to zoom in, you might be able to see one of these ships that are essentially stuck there, that can't get into or through the Strait of Hormuz because of the threat of Iranian attacks. And if you crane your neck a little bit further out from where I am, well, you can see dozens more ships that are lining up to get into that shipping lane that is currently essentially blocked. So I'm currently on the territory of the United Arab Emirates, right next to the border to Oman. The Strait of Hormuz is controlled by Oman and Iran. They are the two who are able to get anything going there, who are able to block it and get traffic moving again. But essentially, if Iran decides and shows through its actions over the last 2 weeks that it is willing to attack tankers that are trying to go through the Strait of Hormuz, well, that leads oil companies, transport companies, insurance companies also, whose prices are going up considerably. Well, it leads all of those to assess that the risk is just too high for tankers to try and get through the strait to the Gulf nations who want to transport their oil out to the wider world. Those countries being the likes of Qatar, the UAE as well, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia as well, and of course Iran itself too. There are hundreds of tankers currently stuck in the Persian Gulf, unable to get through the Strait of Hormuz and bring that oil to the rest of the world. Biggest clients, though, are in Asia. That's where people are most worried about the lack of oil coming through this tight stretch here.
So, Philip, if I understand you correctly, the tankers are just basically sitting there waiting. They're not yet exploring any other alternative routes?
Yeah, there's no movement. We have detected no movement with the naked eye. We also are unable to really detect any considerable movement through any marine traffic applications that there might be. The only exception that there has been over the last few days is 1 or 2 ships with a link to China have been able to get through. China being, well, pretty much Iran's only oil client that it has left. Now, there's no sign of any diplomatic agreement here between China and Iran for their ships to move back and forth. We're not there yet. That is certainly not happening. So, no, no movement from what we can see right now. This is essentially a blocked Strait of Hormuz right now. And that, of course, has a significant impact on geopolitics and, well, the economy of the whole world.
We can have a bit of a visualization here of what's going on right now live in the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know whether we can bring that up. Yeah, there you can see it. That's sort of the strait and making a little bit of an arch. And you can see down here to the right, I don't know whether you can see my cursor moving here. That's all ships waiting, and most of them are tankers. And you can see there's not much moving in, going into the strait here in the middle. On the other side, more ships are waiting. And of course, here, this is all Iran. And you can see a few vessels here, most of them, I would assume, fishing boats. But it's a pretty bleak picture. If you normally look at this busy waterway, it's just full of ships going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Philip, oil, though, isn't the only commodity transported via the strait. Can you talk to us about what other materials are affected and what impacts these backups are having?
Well, look, it's oil and natural gas more than anything. It's 20% of the seaborne deliveries of oil and natural gas that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. A very large percentage thereof go to Asia, and within Asia, it is largely China that gets that oil. From Iran, most notably, of course, has to go through the Strait of Hormuz first. Those ships that we've seen that are linked with China that have been able to get through, those were not tankers, by the way. There are other materials that have to move back and forth, though those are not going to have a particularly large impact on the economy. We've seen the direct impacts here as well. From this exact position, just a few days ago, one could see the fire on board one of these ships. Now, we cannot ascertain for sure which ship that was and where that fire came from, but you know that there have been over a dozen Iranian attacks on ships that have either been close to the Strait of Hormuz or have been attempting to get through. That's precisely the reason why there are so many who now see this essentially as a blockade. It is not an official blockade by Iran. It is not a military blockade. There are, as far as we know, no mines that have been laid by the Iranians, though they, in theory at least, have that possibility. This is a blockade that's just because of the fear of there being further Iranian attacks. And I think that seems to be a realistic fear as well right now.
Just talk to us a little bit more about that, though, how Iran really is actually stopping ships from going through the strait.
Yeah, well, it's with threats, essentially, right now. We heard from the new supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei's son, who has said that he still wants the Strait of Hormuz to be used in this conflict. And what he means with that is he wants it to be closed. That is one of Iran's ways of reacting to US and Israeli attacks on its territory, on its military targets. That is where it has a lot of leverage and a lot of power. Even though Iran might lose a significant amount of its military power in this war with the United States and Israel, it will still be able to control the Strait of Hormuz. And for that to change, well, you'd have to have a major military intervention. The United States, the Trump administration, have already said that they might be considering escorting oil tankers in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. A lot easier said than done. And Donald Trump himself, the US president, has said that he might need to obliterate the Iranian Navy for that to be possible in the first place. And in a sense,
have we lost? Yeah, we lost the audio there.
I think we've lost our audio to Philip, but very interesting discussion we were having there. Philip, can you hear us now?
While we...
Yeah, I think we've seemed to have lost our audio to Philip Crowther, our AP correspondent in the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, he was on the side of the United Arab Emirates and just talking to us really about all of the implications that of this of the Strait of Hormuz being blocked over the last, 10 days or so. While we bring him back, I can just bring you up to date with some of the most important developments that have been happening in the last week or so. Philip Crowther, I think... are you back? Let me run through this recap and then we can go back to Philip Crowther. We've heard, of course, from Iran's new Supreme Leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. He says the Strait of Hormuz must remain shut as a tool to pressure the enemies of Tehran. The Trump administration has issued a 30-day waiver of sanctions on Russian oil exports. This is something we're going to be talking about a little bit more with Stephen Beardsley. This is allowing countries to buy oil and petroleum on board tankers that are already at sea. And the US military says 4 crew members are confirmed dead after a refueling plane with at least 5 crew on board crashed in western Iraq. Philip Crowther, I think we've got you back. Thanks so much for joining us again. Look, you're in the United Arab Emirates. What's it like there specifically where you are now in terms of what port authorities are saying?
Well, there's a possibility of getting some of that oil at least through the United Arab Emirates and to its clients. There's a port just down the road from here. It's called Fujairah. That might be really, really important in the near future. But it's not going to be able to get as much oil out of the United Arab Emirates or other countries as these huge tankers are able to do through their passage through the Strait of Hormuz. So this is very, very painful economically for Gulf countries. Add to that, and this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the oil business, but of course, tourism here has gone down significantly as well. We are seeing very few tourists staying in the United Arab Emirates right now. So there are not a lot of solutions to this problem. There are not a lot of solutions to oil being got out of the Persian Gulf to other countries if it's not through the Strait of Hormuz. That is why this has always been such a huge and important strategic place on the world map, and that's why we are seeing an impact to the global economy in this one precise place.
Before we let you go, I understand that you have other stuff to do as well. Just a quick question. What's the mood like? You touched upon this. What's the mood like there where you are? How are average people being affected by this whole thing that's going on?
Well, I won't deny that it's a little bit eerie. If you've been to the United Arab Emirates and probably most likely to the huge skyscraper, glitzy cities of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, they feel different right now. The local inhabitants, though many of them are foreigners and are actually not Emiratis, a lot of them might well have stayed, but tourists are staying away right now. They're essentially trying to get out. There are very few flights that are leaving this area still. And those that come in, and one of which I was on recently, well, they're relatively empty. So you're seeing a true impact here. This is an area, after all, that, yes, lives off the oil business, but it lives off tourism as well, and it's taking a huge blow. And the likes of the United Arab Emirates and its big cities, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, well, they're receiving a huge blow here because they very much had the reputation, and that reputation might be being shed as we speak, of being a safe place within this region. That certainly doesn't feel that way to many people, because even though these are not wide-scale attacks that Dubai and Abu Dhabi are seeing, there were, again, fragments of a drone or a missile that hit one of the skyscrapers in Dubai only today. That is not something that people in Dubai were expecting to experience in a city like that one. So it's a wake-up call in a sense. And it's not just the United Arab Emirates, of course, who are being targeted by Iran in its retaliatory strikes. It's every country on the Gulf, essentially. Israel, of course, but also then the likes of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They are largely safe, but there can always be something that goes wrong when Iran sends its drones and its missiles in those directions.
Philip Crowther with the Associated Press, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed with all this coming to us from the Strait of Hormuz.
Thank you, Philip.
And our next guest, we're really pleased to have her, Sara Bazoobandi, a non-resident research fellow at the Institute for Security Policy at Kiel University. Sara, thank you so much for all of this. Just could you begin by explaining to us from your perspective how you see Iran's strategy with the situation that's happening right now?
Thank you very much for having me. Well, the situation is very intense. Today, I've been following for example, the Al-Quds Day rallies across the country where traditionally this was in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. The last Friday of the month of Ramadan, the month of fasting, senior officials usually attend these rallies. Crowds usually are to be seen across the country, and in the background there were explosions, there were attacks, and there were reports of people being anxious for being in the street. There is, of course, still some visible support for the regime inside the country. The Speaker of the Supreme National Security Council, Mr. Ali Larijani, spoke today to local media and with a very hawkish language, basically using very insulting vocabulary against President Trump, calling him an ignorant and desperate for not knowing what to do, and expressing willingness for continuing this war. There is also another end to this spectrum, obviously, when you follow, for example, social media and the reaction of the Iranian users in the Farsi realm across the world. You see that there is still a sense of schadenfreude, if you will, a sense of satisfaction for those who are opposing the regime to see these attacks, to see the regime weakened. But at the moment, I don't see any sort of U-turn from the regime side in these current crisis. They seem to be still determined to carry on.
Sara, we'll come back to the sharpening of the tone because that's probably an echo to Donald Trump sort of ratcheting up the rhetoric there. But first of all, yesterday we had this statement from the new supreme leader of Iran. It was not... Here we have at least a part of it. He didn't appear on television. There was no video and no audio of him. It was read by a news presenter. The leverage of blocking the Strait of Hormuz must continue to be used, and opening other fronts where the enemy is highly vulnerable if the war continues will be considered while observing strategic interests. It's all a bit cryptic, and the fact that he wasn't seen. First of all, are you convinced that Khamenei is still with us?
Really hard to say, to be honest, because all the images and all the videos that we've seen of him in recent days are only produced by the artificial intelligence. Some of them are very underwhelming, and they cause sort of criticism and mockery across, again, social media and broadcast media in the Farsi-speaking realm. It is quite possible that he is very severely injured, because they refer to him in the local media, in the state-owned media, as John Boz. It's a Farsi word for describing a war veteran who has been injured permanently for fighting in the war. So I expect, to the very least, to be some serious physical injury to him. I'm not convinced if he is in the position, in a condition to write this statement, for example, himself. It might be written by other elements within the system, but it is very hard to assess whether he's actually still alive or not.
Do we have any questions from the chat? Just as a reminder, this is an interactive discussion, and so we would really love your input with questions and comments that we can put to our guests. Let's put one of these to you, Sara. Libra has written, "They didn't think this through." I guess they must mean the United States.
Probably.
I presume that's what they mean. Do you have anything to say to that?
It is still very early to say, I would say, because, of course, as many have assessed, surviving could have different consequences. Surviving and the regime continuing this episode and not capitulating to the force by Israel and the United States doesn't necessarily mean that there is still sufficient stability for the regime to continue in the short, medium term. But of course, like every military crisis, there are unknown factors, there are unseen circumstances, and I'm sure that both sides have found themselves in very surprising situations.
We have another user comment here. See whether I can actually find it. It's about China from our YouTube user Barty6973. He says, I can't imagine that China is pleased with Iran's actions. What's your stance on that?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. It has two sides to it. First of all, the immediate economic impact of this crisis on China is not negligible. China was in recent years the only buyer of Iranian hydrocarbon products at cheap, discounted prices, quite easily imported. Now that has completely stopped, and not only that, but also from other countries across the Persian Gulf, there is, as your previous guest clearly elaborated, it has come to a halt. But China's interest in the region is not just because of oil. China has a lot of investment, a lot of collaboration with various GCC countries in telecommunication, tech sector, in construction sector. So obviously there is another aspect of China's ties with the region that is being under threat. But also from the overall balance of power struggle between the United States and China, I would imagine that China is watching these episodes with keen interest to see how the United States would come out of it, because that would have a huge impact on overall global power of the United States, its deterrence capabilities, and its influence specifically in the region. Because let's not forget, the United States has been traditionally the security guarantor of the GCC countries. And quite obviously that security is now come under threat by one single player, that being the Islamic Republic in Iran. So China is following this episode, perhaps with hope of seeing the United States coming out of this weaker than before.
Do you see any attempt, though, by China to influence the situation, to influence Iran, and would Iran listen to that?
It's hard to say whether Iran would listen to it or not, because at this stage for Iran it's very important to know what they will receive in exchange for listening to any of the players. Of course, China has had a good level of influence in Iran and on the Islamic Republic, and I think the best manifestation of that influence is the Beijing broker deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia that happened in 2023. Nobody else could solve that political drama, but China has managed to host it and sponsor it, and it was going fairly well until this episode began. So it might be the case that China would be able to pull some strings in Tehran, but direct involvement in the crisis, I really don't expect that happening anytime soon, because China simply doesn't have any reason to want to entangle itself in any form of military confrontation in the region.
Sarah, we have been talking about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and we have kind of framed this as Iran's last, I guess, its biggest card that it has. And we're having a few people disagree with us in the chat about the framing of this discussion. I'm interested for your opinion. Is Iran's actions right now, is it its the last card it has, or does it have anything else?
Well, I really don't want to put myself in the very awkward position of predicting something that turns out to be wrong later on. But let me just answer to your question this way. Iran has tried and tested this method back in the late 1980s during the war with Iraq. The only reason that eventually the war ended and the resolution 598 was signed by both sides was that it actually had a spillover on the oil shipment across the Persian Gulf region. So this is a method that Iran really has tried and tested, and it worked quite well last time. Iran has also increasingly invested in various methods of achieving this pressure, achieving this strategy, fulfilling this strategy, implementing this strategy to create instability across the Persian Gulf and especially Strait of Hormuz. They have talked about it time and again over the past decade or so. They have practiced it with the help of Houthis in the Red Sea. The experience of support of the Houthis in the Red Sea since 2023 has really helped Iran develop its capabilities, knowledge, and strategies in a naval sphere. Now, does Iran have any other methods, any other cards, so to speak, to play? Who knows? I really am not in a position to evaluate that. But I think there is a lot of hope on this particular strategy because of the reasons that I tried to explain earlier.
Yeah, interesting. Gerhard.
We have another user question here that I find quite interesting. If and when I find it. Yes, by Jeff Bilkins, coming via YouTube. Are there any potential Iranian leaders who are acceptable to all parties? That's a question I'd like to put to you, Sara.
All parties, including the Islamic Republic itself, no. Because if you remember what happened in late December, early January, and the massacre of the Iranian protesters, there is clearly a very substantial segment of the Iranian society that oppose the existence of the Islamic Republic. They want to see this regime gone. So there is very little chance, there is very little hope, I would imagine, for the establishment to come up with an alternative from within the current political elite that would be acceptable to that segment of the society. But ultimately, the power and the gun is still in the hand of the Islamic Republic. They might be able to survive this episode. They might be able to come up with some sort of alternative, the so-called, Delcy Rodriguez version of the Islamic Republic. But that definitely would be less than a desirable scenario for many Iranians who oppose the regime.
There's another party to this conflict, not really a party to the conflict, but Doug Hayden is asking whether the UAE and other Middle East countries actually wanted the regime change as much as the US did. Do you think there's broad support for that idea of getting proper regime change in Iran?
Well, then at least the official narrative has changed from what we heard from late Malik Abdullah of Saudi Arabia through the leaked documents, leaked cables back in about a decade ago through WikiLeaks. If you remember, he asked the US ambassador in Riyadh to cut the head of snake, being the regime in Tehran. So but we moved from that narrative to a rapprochement and normalization of diplomatic ties, at least, with the Islamic Republic in 2023 onwards. So there might be it might be the case that deep down the GCC leaders are still quite anxious of the Islamic Republic, but they somehow found a practical working solution for both sides to coexist without really imposing serious direct threat on one another. But that has completely gone out of the window in this episode. So whether this is going to last from February 28th, 2026 onwards is something that really depends on the events as they unfold in the days and weeks to come.
Should we, Sarah, if you can stay with us a little bit longer, it would be really nice. But I would like to bring in Stephen Beardsley from our business department to address a few of the economic issues. Again, Sarah, thank you for this so far. But if you can stay with us, I'd like to come back to you, if I can, with another question. Stephen, first of all, welcome to the table here. If you can just briefly, for our viewers, explain how just such a small stretch of water, like the Strait of Hormuz, can have such a disproportionately big effect on the global economy.
I think probably for a lot of our viewers, they can imagine this as well when they take a look at the map. If they've been paying attention to the news recently, there are choke points when it comes to energy movements around the world. And when we talk about energy, we're talking about fossil fuel in particular. This is incredibly important. It comes out of certain parts of the world in more ample volumes than it does in others. And I think most people know, who have paid any attention, that it comes especially high volumes out of the Persian Gulf. How does it get in? How do ships get in? And how does it get back out? It's through the Persian Gulf, through this strait. That is a choke point geographically and now figuratively as well. Now, it may seem, if you zoom in on this, that it's actually quite wide when you look at it. A ship is quite small, relatively speaking, but actually at its narrowest, they're about navigable channels. These ships have to move through, there's only so much space they can move through. They're about 2 miles wide, one going in, one going out. So that restricts...
they need to have like a certain amount of distance from each other in order to be able to pass through.
That's right. And it means also that actors on either side, you go through Iranian waters, you go through Omani waters, that they could potentially have influence if they wanted to, because there is a restriction in movement right there. And that is what strategists who have looked at this for a long time have said, and Iran has obviously made preparations for in the past, is being able to control or to threaten this strait. And now we're actually seeing this kind of execution that we've talked about for a long time.
What about bypassing it, though? I mean, they can go around, and I believe that, countries and shipyards and companies are preparing to go the long way around.
There are some ways that you could look at it. Right now, we know that Saudi Arabia, for example, wants more ships to go through the Bab al-Mandar Strait, which is leading into the Red Sea. That's another way that they may be able to get to some of that oil that's coming, especially through the pipeline there. Saudi Arabia has a land pipeline, but that's also unwieldy, and it's not. It's a maneuver that's not really common. There's another factor there, which is that there are Houthi rebels, which in the past have threatened shipping in that area. Europe has been especially reliant on that kind of shipping in the past. There's a lot of cargo that goes there, not as much oil and oil products. The Houthis are in a weakened state right now. It remains to be seen what, if any, threat they could pose there. That's one way to try and get around it. Another is this east-west pipeline, this kind of land route, moving it from one area to the next. There's only so much capacity.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but let's bring in this aspect about the Houthis to Sara Bazoobandi. Sarah, what are the military capabilities of the Houthis right now? Stephen, of course, brought in the context that they have been weakened in recent years.
Yes, the Houthis' the capabilities very much directly is strengthened by the support that they receive from Iran, at least since 2023 onwards. We have witnessed that quite clearly. There have been some parts and elements of cheap-produced drones and so on that were sold by Chinese, quote-unquote, private sector producers, but mostly the money, the support, the know-how, the training, everything else has been coming from Tehran. Now, Tehran is very much entangled in its own crisis, and there is obviously a problem across the Persian Gulf, so it makes it very difficult for Iranian shipments of weapons, for example, and artilleries or whatever that they use to provide the Houthis with. And the land corridor doesn't exist, doesn't function that way, so it's mostly through the waters. What I'm hearing, and it's very concerning these days, is that there is a mass mobilization of ground troops by the Houthis. It might be the case, and there is a lot of speculation around this piece of news, that it might be in response to US threatening to put boots on the ground in Iran, or getting Kurdish groups, for example, involved in the crisis with Iran. But at the moment, definitely there is a weakening of the capabilities of the Houthis, and I expect that if this episode carries on and Iran is continued to be under attack, I expect that to be be even further visible that the supports from Tehran towards the Houthis will carry on declining.
Sarah, thank you.
Before we let Sarah go, I have
one more question.
One more question, and that is, I've heard someone say the other day that Donald Trump needs a full military win in order not to lose, and Iran only needs to avoid losing to win. Would you agree, as in that Iran only needs, that the regime only needs to stay barely alive? They don't need a full military win to end up winning this conflict?
Absolutely, yes. They will be able to bounce back despite all the crisis. They will be able to unleash more violence domestically if there is another domestic uprising. And for the United States, they could define the winning in the way that is most convenient and most, suitable for them. This winning could be, we weakened them, we showed them who is the upper hand and who is a global superpower, and now we're done. War with Iran checked, we're going to pack and leave. Or winning could be continuing this episode until the regime actually collapses. I don't know. Nobody really at this point knows what is the defined goal for this crisis. And I think the goals in every crisis could be fluid, but this particular crisis are very, very fluid, I would say.
Sara, thank you so much for your expertise today. We've been speaking with Sara Bazoobandi, non-resident research fellow at the Institute for Security Policy at Kiel University here in Germany. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sara.
Thanks for having me.
And we could continue with Stephen, because I've got a very interesting question here from a user, I believe it's YouTube. New Ronin asks, Iran, if they continue 15 more days, then it's checkmate. Then they have destroyed the world economy and they've won. Would you agree?
That's absolutely correct. No, I don't know. There's no way to know that.
15 days.
Yeah, no one can put a timeline like that on anything. I think the point being made, however, is that as long as they continue to put a stranglehold on this incredibly important choke point, again, then they will be seen as winning in their own kind of way because the global economy will be suffering. And we know who especially uses a lot of gasoline is Americans traditionally, and they're very sensitive to price swings, although, of course, the entire world would face the ramifications of this.
We've got some elements to show on oil prices, right, Gerhard? You've got something to demonstrate how much they've been spiking, but we've got a couple of questions from the chat, and people are sort of writing in saying how this has been affecting them. Someone's written, this means I have no gas to cook with and I couldn't get petrol yesterday, although it's available again today. Carolina, who's one of our viewers in the Philippines. Hi, Carolina, great to have you with us. She says, because of what's happening, electric vehicles are now trending and becoming popular to buy. We'll stick, though, with oil prices. Someone's asked, I think it's also Carolina, lots of questions from you. When will oil prices stop from continuously rising? What have you got to show us there, Gerhard? Well,
we've just got a live view of the oil price right now. Brent crude being slightly above 100 here, 109, up again 0.5%, roughly. And Stephen, I would like to ask you, we discussed that yesterday, I believe, when it was announced, or the day before yesterday, that the International Energy Agency had agreed, all 32 members, to tap their strategic reserves. And you said to me that that actually might not calm the markets, that it actually drive the price back up. Why is that? And it seems to have happened.
We don't know for sure if that's the reason markets have gone up. And there's also been a lot in the news about ships being hit. And so it's been clear that there is an incredible danger in the Strait of Hormuz. That's been proven over that same time. But you're right, some people have also speculated that perhaps just by pulling out this big gun so early and saying 400 million barrels, that you're really signaling it's a lot, and it also signals that you expect this to go on for a while. And so perhaps there could be something in there that the markets are seeing that they're unhappy with. It is interesting because 400 million barrels is a lot. There's also another 100 million barrels that appears to be on Russian ships floating at sea right now. We were talking to one economist earlier in our department who was saying, also you have to keep in mind that in China, they're sitting on a lot of reserves. We're not exactly sure how much, but they have, of course, a huge appetite for oil as well, and they're sitting on substantial reserves. And even before all of this started, and we've been saying this from the beginning, the oil markets were actually pretty slack. There was more supply than demand. So there is a lot out there. We're not seeing shortages yet, actually. I know that one of your viewers mentioned shortages. Maybe we're starting to see, some of it in some areas, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was Southeast Asia, to be honest. But it's a reaction over the possibilities of this conflict and what it could mean in the future, right? And what it could mean as that oil just does not keep going. And also, some production has been killed already in Kuwait and Iraq. That's really problematic, depending on how those wells were shut down and what it means for the future. So I think all of this is sort of drumming around with investors.
But you're saying possibly they pulled out the big guns a little bit too early. It's
hard to say. There's speculation that that's maybe one of the reasons why prices have gone up, but you can't ever say for sure, right? Investors are looking at a lot of different information right now, and they're trying to judge where this thing is going to go.
You mentioned Russia there. The US has temporarily lifted sanctions. What impact did that have?
Yeah, we talked about this from the beginning of the war as well. It would benefit Russia because if nothing else, it would drive up the cost of a barrel of oil. And they benefit more when that price is higher because of the sanctions that are put on them. And many oil producers benefit generally when the prices go up, although it also can hurt them because new entrants come in and start competing against them. But anyways, we knew that it would be a good thing. But now when you see these sanctions lifted, it's also going to bring in a lot of money for them. So 100 million barrels on the ocean is what Russia has said right now. They now have free rein to go and sell that without basically running afoul of sanctions or worrying that they will run afoul. That's going to bring in a lot of money for them. I believe some of the estimates were in the billions in 1 month. This is an economy that's been struggling right now, right? And if you're in Europe where we are, if you've been looking at, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the role that its economy plays in bankrolling that, and oil plays in bankrolling that, then it is a big deal, actually, if the sanctions are lifted and if they suddenly are starting to look a little bit better in terms of money that's gushing in.
A couple of interesting questions there coming in via YouTube. Jeff Bilkins is saying this hurts the average American really bad. Their cost of living was already struggling. Their whole life and economy runs on gas, which is certainly true. But you mentioned there that who is profiting from this. And we've been discussing in the last few days how fuel prices at filling stations have been going up, especially in Germany. They've really skyrocketed. Are oil companies currently lining their...
I mean, it is obviously they're going to earn more. It's a good situation for oil producers right now. They're in a better position. As I said, it can also ruffle the industry somewhat if the price goes up pretty high and it looks like it's going to stay that way because then new entrants might come in. So let's say you're OPEC Plus, right? You are a bunch of nations that are oil producing. You work together to keep prices at a certain place. You want them to be high enough so that you can make money. You don't want them to be too high so that suddenly the Americans start going, you know what, we need to invest in more drilling of our shale oil and put more of that out in the market. So they've always tried to kind of run this position and find the right price. But in general, yes. I mean, when there's more production, then there is more money to be made. The question is on the lower ends in terms of, the fuel stations, things like that. Are they making big money off of this? Are they able to manipulate prices? There will probably be investigations into that. Here in Germany, there were investigations in the past in 2022 after that shock from the Russia invasion. And what we know is that, these are sectors that are there's only a few players. There's less and less players. They get more and more condensed. And so that does sort of lead to the ability to, or it sort of dampens the ability to kind of have price aberrations.
Variety.
Price variety is probably a better word. Something where you can really have something else besides, what these big players are all seeing, and they're all relying on the same distribution, they're all relying on the same refineries. Then there's only so much they're going to change prices from one another. And there's a lot of input that they're getting as well every day about all this kind of stuff. So they can raise the price multiple times if they want. And that's also been an issue here and in other places. Whether they're really rolling in money right now, I don't know. I don't think the fuel stations are, but oil companies are probably not.
It has a certain taste to it, if you ask me, because they're all sort of, the prices seem, no matter where you look,
and we should
up.
also obviously acknowledge that oil companies are running a lot of these fuel stations as well,
exactly.
Right? So the individual runners of the stations, I don't know, but obviously these big oil companies are profiting.
I guess a lot of people, though, are wondering, aside from, I guess, petrol prices, how this will affect them in a practical sense. Is this going to make other things in, trade between countries commodities and other things more expensive for the average consumer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it will. I mean, as long as oil stays up, it depends on how long this is going to go on. And that's what we've been hearing from economists as well. They say there's a better scenario, there's a middle-term scenario, and there's the worst scenario. And the better scenario is that maybe this lasts for a month, and then maybe the ramifications aren't so baked into a wider system that really depends on fueling trade and global commerce with fossil fuel. The longer it goes on, the more contracts have to be rewritten, the more it's going to get expensive, and the more it's going to enter into the bloodstream of the whole overall economy, raise those prices, just like we've seen tariffs do recently, just like we see any kind of supply shortage do, right? I mean, we've seen this over the past 5 years since Corona. We've gotten used to seeing these kind of aberrations suddenly, and this would be one of them.
Yeah.
We've got one viewer comment there. Seiki Mashan says, because of what's happening, EVs, electric vehicles, are now trending and becoming more popular to buy. Do you see that?
It depends on how long this happens, right? Yeah. So one of the worst case scenarios that economists, when they look at this, they say, let's say $150 a barrel. And let's say that it's going to last for a while. Then you get something called demand destruction. And that is that people say, you know what? I'm getting rid of this combustion engine car, and I'm going to finally get one of these EVs, right?
So we would need $150 per barrel for
not
that.
necessarily. Everyone has their own sort of level, but you would expect it at a much wider spread level.
Yeah.
Once the price gets higher, and it's very clear to a lot of people this isn't really going to change, or maybe their mind is made up that, you know, this market, this oil is just so crazy. I want to sort of step away from it as much as possible.
Like maybe tip them over the edge a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the idea. People start changing their behavior. Buying an EV would be one. It's a bigger step, of course. Maybe people walk more if they have the opportunity to take buses. I don't know. But I would also, to that, I would add that, you know, we're short on liquid natural gas here in Germany right now because of this. And that means the price of gas has risen. And the price of gas gets added into the generation cost of electricity. So electricity prices will also probably actually go up as well. Something to keep in mind. And they're already pretty high here in Germany.
How's our chat looking, Gerhard?
There's another question directly for Steve. The user is also Seiki Mashan, very active user there. Steve Bisley, that's why our government implemented 4 days work per week instead of 5 due to
Philippines.
That's the Philippines. As well as the usage of aircon has set to 24 degrees Celsius. That's true.
Yeah, I'm not aware of those steps, but I mean, governments who are not yet facing supply shortages but could be very soon will probably be instituting kind of rules to basically limit the use of oil and products that are basically in short supply right now. And we know that with the Strait of Hormuz, something like 80% of what's flowing through there, oil and oil products, is headed towards Asia. So these are the countries that are going to feel it, and everyone's going to take their own steps to try and limit the consequences.
There's another question here from Protozoa Princess coming in via YouTube. And that's a very valid question. Why aren't we hearing more about moving away from dependence on oil in general, since it makes the global economy so vulnerable? Not to mention climate issues.
We've been talking about this for years. The thing is, the politics around it change all the time. And also the markets change. Like I said, oil was actually in pretty good supply in the past year plus. Prices have been relatively stable. Before everything started, it was about $73 a barrel, and that was actually up because people were afraid of Iran. It's been around 60 or so. In these phases, when supply is actually good, people forget about, you know, how bad it can be when supply is not good. And we see that, for example, in the U.S. Supply has been very good. They're exporting a lot of their major oil exporter now. And gas prices have stabilized after some shocks in past years. We see that the fuel efficiency standards for cars, for example, it's not really changed dramatically. The EV subsidies, obviously Trump took that off the board. He's got a very political approach to the whole thing. But I think in general, you've seen that the size of cars has not gotten any smaller. You're not seeing fuel efficient cars being really emphasized in the U.S. like you were in years past, where there had been oil scares. You know, after the 70s, there was a reconsideration of, okay, what do we want out of our cars to at least dampen the demand all at once that goes on these gas stations? And they did go up and up and up, but that's really tailed off in recent years. And in terms of climate, people in the past few years, governments have really been focused on ginning up their economies, really spurring economic activity more than they have on climate-solving measures. And now we see as well, again, these dependence issues coming back, and this will be perhaps another boost for efforts to promote renewable energies, right? EVs, like you mentioned, Jared, you know, this kind of thing. This will go through the political apparatuses as well. How do we, you know, maybe we need to actually make stronger moves in this area.
So that's something like a constructive thing that could come out of this, actually moving in a more sustainable, positive direction when it comes to action on renewable energy.
I think people, when they feel it in their pocketbooks, that's when they take action, right? We can all believe in environmental causes and things like that, and we you know, regardless of what your belief is, you know, regarding what steps the politics needs to take, you're going to be moved by your pocketbook, right? And that's what we see again.
Yeah, Stephen, great discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a
great
lot, guys.
having you here.
Yep.
Yeah, we really appreciate your insights today and your questions and comments. It's been really, really beneficial to the discussion. And of course, we do these basically every day. So please do come back when we have our next live stream and contribute. Your insights and your questions are super valuable to the discussion. And as you've seen, it really propels it along. So thank you to everyone for your input.
Thanks a lot for watching.